Welcome to the Edifice Complex, the property design and development podcast. Let your hosts Adam Muggleton and Robert Bean keep you up with who is innovating and doing great work, perspective on the adjacent possible, and challenges to the status quo.
Okay, welcome to the Edifice Complex. This is an unusual episode. It is not often I am in the same place or even in the same country as one of our guests. So this is a special episode. The moon has aligned, the gods have aligned, and Matthew and I are in the same place. Now, Dr. Matthew Marson is an alumni of the podcast. He's been on once, maybe twice. I should check that. But he's on today for a very special reason. He has written a book about a very hot subject, this book, The Smart Building Advantage, Unlocking the Value of Smart Building Technology. So we're here to talk to him about this today, right? But the podcast is still going as usual. This is just a one-off special episode for a very special book for a very special guest. So welcome.
Thank you for having me.
So just for the guests who, I know we have a big viewership, but just for people who might not know who you are, can you just give us a quick rundown on your background?
Sure, yeah. I trained as an architect and an engineer, but it didn't feel like I was doing the right stuff early in my career, so became very interested in technology and what that could mean for the built environment, and have been very lucky to work on all sorts of daft stuff around the world. If it's things like the Salesforce Tower in San Francisco, 22 Bishopsgate in London, or some of the work at Neom here in the Middle East, I've been able to, I think, make all the mistakes perhaps possible in all things to do with smart buildings and cities, which I suppose is kind of where the book came from.
Okay, so let's talk about the book. So I have feelings about smart buildings, mostly negative actually, due to the fact I'm old and cynical, but let's put that to the side. So what made you write this book?
Mainly that I was annoyed that I had to keep repeating myself on loop. And when you are like trying to explain what the economic advantage of having a smart building could be, a lot of people are very distrustful of some of your claims. So this helps me to basically show my working, and it takes a full book to get into all the detail and stuff of it. So that is probably the primary reason, and then secondary, perhaps a little bit of narcissism.
Yeah. Nothing wrong with that, says the king of the narcissist. So there will be a link in the show notes to where you can get this book. I really like it, and I'm not saying that because you hear it, because there's a few things that really work for me here. I like how-to books that lay it out, and this does that. It has tons of references in, and it really sort of takes you from A to Z. So first thing I want to say is I get frustrated, and I'm allowed to be because I'm towards the end of my career now. I get frustrated. We talk about smart buildings, right? Yet most of the buildings I go into, particularly in the Middle East, can't even control humidity and temperature properly. And my old riff is, if you've got a BMS or a BAS, you've got a smart building. Mm-hmm. So why is the current technology, forget smart buildings for a minute, just like controlling the building, why are there problems with that? Why do you think that is a bit of a miss?
I don't think designers fully understand feedback loops, actually, and that you get from the architectural sketch, you've got a couple of maybe a blue arrow that shows cool air coming in and replaces the stuffy hot air that leaves, and I'm not convinced that people think about it any more than that. Like they talk about computational fluid dynamics, you see that very rarely. And when it comes to like having this sort of perfect design that you would have done a detail or perhaps construction, if that's a REBA 4 or 5, then it gets handed over to a contractor, and that is all out of the window because it's about optimizing margin. And so corners are cut, and I think that is why those feedback loops, although they might have had the very best of intention, never really happen.
Yeah, that's true. So we're sort of almost edging into like the difference between design, bid, build, and design and build, right? So having worked on both types of procurement, I do not meet many people who are happy with the outcome on a design and build. Sorry, design and build contractors there. But, if I was a client, knowing what I know now, I would go design, bid, build. Mm-hmm. But what you were saying there was about incentives, right? So I personally think life and contracting and building buildings in general is about incentives and disincentives. And I do not see the incentives for controlling a building properly because there's no feedback loop from the user, right? So buildings are designed, buildings are constructed. I don't see the occupant in that loop anyway, feeding back into that.
No.
I mean, take hotels, right? We're in a country here with hotels everywhere. The worst thing that happens if you own a hotel, someone doesn't check in again, right?
Yeah.
It's not a good experience, they go.
And there will be others.
But there will be others just right behind them. So there's no feedback or incentive to do anything now. Again, owners of hotels who are going, But is there any way of changing that? I mean, is there any way of using technology to get that feedback in?
Well, I suppose that's the promise of smart, really. If you can put technology in the palms of people's hands that's not too complicated to use, like some of the hotel rooms here, you need to be qualified to fly the Starship Enterprise, I think, to work out how to switch the lights off. But if you perhaps did that with some voice activation and you used normal English or a mobile app that's a bit more user-friendly, then a person, you would hope, gets to be a bit more participatory in their environment. But smart then is also, on the other hand, a problem because we try to use bits of AI or machine learning or automations. Yeah. And again, we've taken the person back out of it because we think we know best.
Okay, yeah, I think we should focus on hotels because I travel a lot. And you're right, sometimes you need a diploma in engineering just to turn the lights on, and then you're lying in bed at night and there's so many flashing lights in the room, you feel like you're on the deck of the Starship
and
Enterprise.
like if you use Fahrenheit and you've got to convert it to Celsius and vice versa, and it's all a bit much, isn't it?
Can we all agree Fahrenheit should be over, please? Thank you. Anyway, moving on. So, all right, notwithstanding the fact there's some problems just with controlling buildings generally for temperature, humidity, IAQ, IEQ, the layer of what's the definition of a smart building? What are we layering on top of that to call it a smart building?
Well, I'm not sure I've got one. So if you'll allow me to go around the houses,
right.
If I think about the recent sort of 15 years of history in smart, starting in the early 2010s, that was probably the first time that we had reliable enough Internet of Things devices that you could probably call it a smart building. But back then, the only sorts of smart buildings that we were doing were very energy focused. It was all about finding energy conservation measures that you could prove either the bill was cheaper at the end or it wasn't. So it was a very simple business case. Right. But as we started to recover from the 2008-2009 crash, rents towards the middle of the 2010s were crazy, and it meant that businesses had to respond by... we used to give people around 23 meters squared per full-time employee, and in those middle years, we reduced it to in some cases, to be as aggressive as 6 meters squared per FTE.
Less than half.
Yeah. But one of the things that helped make that okay was how popular WeWork was at the time, because we thought that we wanted to work on benches in open plan, and because somebody had carved the word hustle into the cucumber that went into the water cooler, it meant that we actually really liked it. So smart buildings then probably changed their definition to be about space optimization. But as we started to see a degrade in the quality of workspaces, smart buildings were used again to lie to people who felt a bit like a battery chicken. And we said, no, you're not a battery chicken. You're a free-range chicken. Look, you've got a CO2 sensor. And then towards the end of the 2010s, it was all about health and well-being, productivity, like what innovation is. And then obviously COVID happened as smart buildings reinvented what they were about then, and it was compliance. Who would come in when things had been cleaned. Then we used smart buildings again to get people back to the office with mobile apps and how they could book space and check things in. And as to what comes next and the next iteration of smart buildings, I think only time will tell.
Sounds like a hustle, right? Hey, this ain't working, reinvent it, this ain't working. Adam Newman, you've got a lot to answer for. He was a guy who started WeWork.
But if you want a technical answer,
it
is to take the data out of the existing control systems and abstract it into a more IT form so that you could build other applications, find insights, or be able to control things through other methods. If that is mobile phones, voice activation, your signature dance move could be one. Like anything you can kind of think of, it helps to take it from a control system into more of an IT one.
Okay, so let's peel this onion back a bit, right? Because there's layers to this. There's the user experience, there's the owner's ROI, there's the data issues, sovereignty, data passing, there's the interoperability. So let's start from the owner's point of view, right? So I'm an owner. Mm-hmm. Why would I want a smart building?
You probably don't from an economic perspective, because you're investing in technologies where the tenant gets the benefit. So you've paid for it, but you don't see much of the upside. But the reason that it makes sense is because as a developer of speculative space, you need to be better than next door. And I think that smart buildings, particularly for parts of Europe and North America, are just a hygiene factor, and you expect it in the same way that you might expect some sustainability credentials.
Hygiene factor, I haven't heard that terminology since I left university.
So I don't think you can charge a premium for having a smart enabled space, but I think you would suffer a discount if it wasn't there.
So it's really like I've just got to keep up with the Joneses if I'm an owner, right? Mm-hmm. But there may be a payoff in the future as the technology matures, right? Okay, so let's talk about the technology layer. And let's talk about the concept of the master systems integrator. So I call that the master building systems integrator because, I have to be different because I'm a narcissist. But the reality is you've got different technology shops, different physical technologies, different languages. Isn't the challenge getting them all to work together?
It is. And in the past, it was definitely a problem, which is where the role has come from. But to perhaps oversimplify it, I see them as somebody with a Pritt stick and a can-do attitude. And we would hope that in the development of the industry that we wouldn't need that role going forward. Because specifications have already developed to a point where we're talking about standard languages, or we've probably settled on a very lightweight web language called MQTT that people are talking about doing. But so now that we've solved the sort of transport layer of the data, the part that folks are looking at next is the proper structuring of it into a normal nomenclature, so that an application knows what to expect if you wanted to, compare, I don't know, let's say the number of sick days reported per year for people that sit on the west corner of a building, as an example. Yeah,
I mean, I've always, the fantasy of all this working to me looks like a building is a data generation machine, right? I mean, it's just throwing off data at every level for every metric you could possibly imagine. So you've got to warehouse that data, right? In a pool, then you've got to analyze it, structure it, analyze it, right? Mm-hmm. And then you've got to store it. Now, the dream scenario is you can analyze it, get insights, what's the optimum this, what's the optimum that? Are we meeting all these parameters? If you are, boasting about them in a way, right? But, how far away are we from doing that in reality?
Oh, I think we can do it. Right now, it's possible.
You heard it here.
Yeah. The bigger problem is having the right confluence of skills that you can get something meaningful at it. And because it requires so many specialists in order. So firstly, you've got all the controls folks that you would hope have set it up and commissioned it right in the first place, so that your base data is trustable.
Right.
You then need somebody that knows how to structure databases and tag all the bits and pieces, so you know what the things you're mixing together to get an answer. You probably then need a data scientist of some sort in order to run the complex statistical stuff. And then you probably need somebody that understands the context of that business, so that they can turn that back into business value. And you don't normally get those four people in the same room.
They certainly don't work for the contractor. That is for sure, right? So the list of jobs you just described there, I guess, will wind up residing in the FM team?
I'm not sure. I think it goes broader. And so this is probably more of an industry problem anyway. When you outsource parts of your FM, I think you think that you've absolved yourself from the responsibility of the physical elements of the business that you run. So if that is, hospitality, if it's a stadium, if it's an office, but I think there's this huge disconnect that we see more broadly in that I think your building is, as the book suggests, a driver for strategic value. So if you're not properly involved with what that means and the experience that it's delivering to a customer, I think you're missing a trick.
I've got to call you out. Strategic value, great buzzword. What does that mean, really? Give that to me like I'm a retarded Labrador.
It's so let's say if you tell me that you really care about the experience that you're delivering for your employees in an office,
right?
Because this is probably the easiest example. everybody can say that, but what proof points are there that you've done something that's meaningful? So because you've invested in all those CO2 sensors, are you actually increasing the number of air changes an hour from your air handlers? Or have you actually got a load of people that they've got an allergy to pollen? So to prevent hay fever on days of high pollen, and you might use an outdoor weather station, you change the settings in the mixing box in your air handler to pull it through a HEPA filter. Yeah, a HEPA filter. And then if you link that back to your enterprise resource planner on all the sick days, can you prove that those things that you've done have had an actual impact? So I can say that I care about my employees, but if I do things like that, then I'm proving my action.
The Edifice Complex will continue in just a moment.
Are you struggling with paperwork, spreadsheet overload, and project management? Then Blue Rhythm is the solution to help you. Streamline your commissioning and project management process. Go paperless. Increase efficiency, and save money. Blue Rhythm is commissioning and project management software by practitioners for practitioners, adapting to your workflows and processes, and doing things your way. Blue Rhythm provides painless and fast onboarding by bringing your existing workflows, forms, checklists, and issues logs into Blue Rhythm for you. You can use their pre-built templates to customize your commissioning workflows, and Blue Rhythm can fully handle the transition from your current software platform. Blue Rhythm is secure, scalable, and reliable, backed by amazing support, and accessible 24/7 on any Windows, iOS, or Android device. Why are you still using paper and hard-to-control spreadsheets? Start your free Blue Rhythm account today at bluerhythm.com.
And now, back to the show.
So you've just described what I always talk about as the future of building commissioning, answering the how question. How have you met IAQ? How have you met building code?
Yeah.
How have you prevented allergy, like everyone sneezing when there's pollen, high pollen counts, right? So that, again, that's the integration of the weather station with the smart building, right?
Yeah. But then the part that makes it strategic is I only say that I care about my people. Maybe there is some altruism, but if I know that like the average white collar worker has 4 sick days a year, if I can have them work for an extra one, I've just, I've added 1/220th of a working year in productivity back to the bottom line of the business. And if I times that by the thousands of people that work for that company, then that's a big number, and you've probably paid back your investment in that technology.
So so the productivity gains, which is always a hard retrospective analysis, effectively, right?
Oh, and I'm not sure you can define productivity because it's different in every context, but I think you can measure universally productivity leakage, which is all the stuff that adds up that prevents you from doing something productive. If that is waiting for the lift, if it's the Wi-Fi dropping, if it's me catching stuff at work.
30 seconds here, 2 minutes here.
Yeah.
I like that. I'm stealing that, by the way. Productivity leakage. Thank you.
No worries. The British government did a report in 2016 called the Stoddart Review that said that I think it's 25% of a standard white-collar worker's day is productivity leakage because of all those things.
Wow, that's high. That's sort of, again, empirically or sort of instinctively, when I'm working with some of the teams at ASG, my view is if you're getting 2 to 4 hours of actual real productive work a day, you're killing it, right? Between coffee breaks, interruptions, like stop starts, that's without
gossip, notifications.
Yeah. Bing, bing, bing. Right, yeah. That's cool, actually. So, yeah, okay. Now, let's talk about data sovereignty. Now, let's say I'm a large developer, but I'm a developer, owner, operator. I'm built perfect. University campus, right?
Yeah.
University of Toronto has 176 buildings, right? So, I'm not selling them all off anytime soon. So I care about them, right? Let's say I'm collecting, they're all data. Somehow I found a budget. I've made them smart buildings. Dreams are free. And I'm collecting all this data. So I own that, right? I'm University of Toronto.
Yeah.
Right? So I could then package that and sell that. If I could analyze it, I could turn it into design guidance data. Mm-hmm. Now, in the event where I'm a developer, a speculative developer, let's say I'm a developer, I'm Land Securities, I've developed these buildings, I've leased them out. Who owns the data in that building? Landsec. I guess, right?
I think it depends on who paid for the system.
Right.
So
Now,
if it's in base build, I would expect the developer to have control of that. But if it was an add-on kind of top-up to base build that was done as part of a fit-out for a tenant, I would expect them to own it.
so do you see disagreements in the future between who owns what data and who uses that data?
Oh, yeah, they exist today.
really?
So it's not just the future. Yeah, no, that's already here.
Say more.
Yeah. Well, it's also, I think you have to consider like how valuable it actually is.
Yes.
Because every building is different. A lot of a particular insight might be so specific to the way that it's designed or just how people are using it on that particular day that it's like, okay, I'm not sure my temperature data is anything particularly valuable, but cheers.
But I suppose if you integrate in, I don't know, the access control data, the tag, like the pass tagging data, it becomes a bit sort of like creepy surveillance at that point, maybe? How does that work?
I think we've had it for years. It's just that it's now easier to get out of the database. That's the only thing that's really changed. Otherwise, that relationship has always existed.
I guess if you're I don't know, say you're a big accounting firm leasing that office, you are interested in that data. Who comes, what, where, right? You know, who's in the bathroom too long, that sort of stuff, right?
Yeah.
Interesting.
People do look at that sort of thing.
Yeah. That's becoming an issue. So I remember when I first started in the sustainability space, this was about almost 20 years ago. I am old. We used to talk about 15-minute cities. And in that context, this is before IoT, it was about urban planning and designing like permeable walkability, you know, keeping journeys short through design, like location of this, okay. But it sort of morphed into a sort of 1984 like geofencing, you need a QR code to go to this space and not that space. Mm-hmm. This is where I'm sort of split between I like the original version. We're going to make it walkable and everyone's going to like, it's going to be, you know, like a little village. And it sort of turned into I need a QR code to move from one space to another. And that's the thing I find a little bit disturbing about it. Do you see it driving down the dark side or enabling a dark future like that?
Well, I think COVID was probably a good test of it because things were definitely driving that way and people rebelled against it.
They did, yes.
Yeah, so I think the second it makes things feel creepy or even to the point of inconvenience, that is when a digital service dies. At least I hope.
I hope, yeah. I mean, it turns everything into a permission-based activity, right?
Yeah.
So a QR code is basically a permission. Yeah. You know, I went to several job sites recently and I had to have a QR code to get on. It's like getting a visa to go in, right? So, you know, I don't know. I think that's the dark side to it. But I'm fascinated by the data sovereignty issue, and as certain data becomes very valuable, that's where you're going to see, I guess there needs to be legal cases here and precedents, right?
Yeah, I think the person that stands to benefit the most from the ownership, or at least a copy of the data, would be the AEC firms.
Yeah.
I can see a future where they will be litigated against if the buildings don't deliver to the design standard that they promised.
Right, now you're getting onto one of my other pet subjects. You know, let's be honest, a lot of building design, particularly in the HVAC sort of building services space, is copy and paste spreadsheets. Let's be honest, right?
Oh, and specifications. Yeah.
I saw a specification calling out a firm that went bust in 1988. I saw one of them today, literally, right? So if you have accountability via measurement and IoT, I think there is a future where some big firm is going to promise, a certain level of performance. Then the owner is going to have the barefaced cheek to actually test that performance, and there's going to be a massive lawsuit and someone's going to get smashed.
Exactly. Neighbours is probably the stepping stone to that.
Yes, yeah, because it's sort of formalising and standardising the method procedure. So how does NABERS fit in? Do you think NABERS is a good evolution, and do you think that starts to supersede LEED?
100%. Yeah, well, it certainly supersedes, in my opinion, BREEAM.
Yes.
Because that is based on your design value.
God. Sorry.
So, yeah. But whereas what happens in reality, that's what Neighbours is looking at, because IoT has enabled it.
Yeah, I mean,
the promise of smart.
Again, mixed feelings on BREEAM and LEED. It's been great in that it's raised awareness. It's set, so LEED and BREEAM, I think, set good intentions, right?
Yeah, for sure.
But now we're past that. Now we've got to get into what's really going on here, right? And this is where I am positive on IoT and measurement and performance, because you could automate that measurement and performance and it could just spit out reports and send it to whoever, right? Mm-hmm. I am a bit mystified why owners don't do that. Any thoughts on that?
I think a lot of the times they don't trust the source system that they get it from because of perhaps the way it was commissioned, or that a corner was cut and they're missing a little bit, and they wait for perfection rather than just like the right sort of direction on things, and you can add extra capability later. I think, or just often you don't get very many technology skills. In the firms that own buildings, they care about asset value typically, and that's not having to worry about points of data from a BMS and how I can optimize that going forwards. I think it's changing. It
is changing. This is why I think the evolution of the FM role, I think, is going to be quite fast over the next 10 years, because they're the natural people. If I'm an owner, I don't want to know how you do it. Just give me the baby, don't give me the labour pains. So I'm probably going to task my FM provider to set this up and give me that report every month or every quarter, right? The issue is getting the skills if you're the FM provider, right? You've got to upskill a lot of people or train or bring that in. So let's talk about the Master Systems Integrator. Shout out to Nexus Labs. You know Nexus Labs, right? Yeah, James Ice. So that's where I really first picked that up, that concept, and really sort of drilled down on it. I love the idea of it. I think it needs to be expanded to be the building systems integrator, right? Because there is an electromechanical and a digital integration that has to happen in any building, quite frankly, right? This is a unicorn we're asking for, right? We're asking for a unicorn with a purple mane and a rainbow thing, and they're going to fly over the moon. I've yet to meet someone who can do this job. Do you know anybody?
And there are a couple out there, but even then I don't think they're unicorn enough.
No.
Because just to glue all the in-building systems together, that's only it's one side of the coin. The other side of the coin is then what I was saying earlier. How do you translate that into business value? Yeah. Isn't that like the whole point? Like, oh great, I've got all the data, but it stops at that point. It will live in some sort of database somewhere, and people don't invest in the business process mapping that it takes for a bit of insight that the IoT has generated to what that means for my business. It's the equivalent of you as a big occupier somewhere buying a load of sensors that measure occupancy and then being really upset that that plastic box didn't reshape your entire portfolio. And those examples exist.
They do.
Yeah.
Right now. I'm laughing because I've had a recent example of that.
And so, as much as I love the concept of an MSI, they're not MSI enough for me. I want them to go into business process for the occupiers, but maybe I'm expecting too much.
Well, we're starting to get inquiries in for this role, right?
Yeah.
And when I go in to meet clients and describe what it involves, you can see they go a bit cross-eyed and think, I'm not paying for that.
Yeah. Do you not do that anyway? Isn't that
design and build will push that problem down? And of course, that problem never gets solved, right?
Well, and to be fair to them, like if I'm paying you to build my building, I expect you to set it up properly. Why do I have to pay a premium for you to make all my systems talk together? It doesn't happen in a car.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
So this is the thing. No owner says, okay, design and deliver my building, I'm okay with 2,000 defects. If it don't work to me, don't worry, I'm going to lease it out. Says no one, right?
Yeah.
Right? Because if you got your car with 100 defects didn't quite work, there would be a problem, right? Mm-hmm. Yet we get buildings like that all the time. But this is why I'm sort of optimistic actually for the future. I think the technology becomes so cheap and so pervasive that it will be hard to ignore the poor performance.
Yeah.
And that's going to create the demand for the MSI, right? But who does that person work for? And how soon do they start?
There's a lot of boutiques that are out there who are doing great jobs and have, I think, made a big difference in the market. When do they start? They're typically they might be procured in stage 4, and then they start on site during actual construction.
Hang on. But that's Reba stage 4 for our US audience.
Yes. So at detailed design, they get brought in, and then they would start at construction. But you probably wanted to involve them in some of the design work that happened at concept, because they would know the best-in-class ways of doing it that your design engineer wouldn't.
I mean, if I was a developer who really wanted to do this, I'd probably bring them in on my team and say, like, tell me how to do this and not lose my shirt, basically,
yeah,
right?
I think so.
Yeah. So, yeah, I think that role exists, and I think that's going to be a hot ticket. Skill up, everybody. That's where it's going. Okay. So, at the moment, I would say that's a tough role to fill, and there's not many people who can do it.
Yeah.
So, you're going to pay for that, owners, let's be clear, right? And pushing it onto the contractor isn't going to work because the contractor's not going to do it, right?
Well, they don't have a vested interest to it.
No.
It might be done in a box ticking exercise, and you'll just get a couple of front end screens, and you won't be able to trust that the back end's there.
Correct. Yeah, because there's a validation of the accuracy of that data before you can start using it as actionable data, right?
Yeah.
What do you think the barriers are right now? Like the top 3 issues preventing sort of like the breakthrough into like operationally ready buildings that can be run on an automated basis and spit out great data. What are the top 3 issues stopping that today, do you think?
None of them are technical. But you can do anything you want with IoT. I mean, just look at what you can do with smart home.
Right.
I can do so many if this then that integrations for free that I can make the lights flash red if a stock price goes down. If the sensor under my bed knows I've got into bed, then it can play my whale music and dim everything to blue. So like that's not a problem. So I'd say the top one is, and the purpose of the book, that people don't understand or don't believe that there's a business case for it, and they get given these sort of what feels like a big ticket item, which in comparison to construction, it's not very much at all. No. And they think that's the first place that they can probably cut a corner because they don't see the translation of it into business value. They think it's just a gadget. So I'd say that's the first one. The second one is probably then some of the sales tactics that are happening in the market. It seems that it is okay just to lie about what your product does and doesn't do.
I'm shocked.
Yes. We've totally lost any form of credibility, it feels like, from the vast majority of vendors are out there, to being overextending their role in case studies, to presenting you something that you think is viable today but is actually the roadmap for the next 18 months, to just flat out making things up. I've kind of seen it all, and I'm horrified with what's out there. So I don't blame people for not going ahead, because it just feels like you're going to get scammed. And then probably the third one is, as an industry, real estate doesn't feel very collaborative. So if somebody does do something well...
That was very diplomatic.
Yes, thank you. I've done media training recently. It feels like... So if you've done something good, people keep it to themselves. There's no sharing of best practice. So although they've achieved something, it's probably not unique, it's probably not that special, but it stops everybody else from learning from it, and we move the whole industry forward. I don't understand, in the sort of 10, 15 years that I've been doing this, why smart buildings aren't yet just de facto. Why is it still a special thing? Why do I call it a smart building? Shouldn't it just be a building now?
Very true. Well said, actually. Very well said.
So those 3 things, I think, is why I'm not onto whatever the next version of smart is.
Yeah. So what we're saying is the technology's there.
Yeah.
The data management and storage is there, actually.
Yeah.
Right?
And it's cheap.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's dirt cheap, and the price is falling per unit probably every month.
Yeah.
So it is actually a sort of socio-economic legal thing.
Yeah.
Right. A collaborative thing that's stopping it.
We've got standards, we've got choice of vendors, we've got applications, we've got the whole shebang.
That's interesting, because what we're saying is that people are not demanding it. So this is my whole riff, right? The reason we get buildings that don't work or are not operation ready is because people actually don't demand it. And there's no consequence for coughing up something that doesn't work.
I don't know, I'm not sure if we've just accepted the situation that it is, and because we've not seen very many examples of how it's done brilliantly, just because of all of the different parties that are involved. I think if you designed it, built it yourself and delivered it and did your own technology, you would get something amazing. But there are I can only think of probably 2 or 3 examples in the world where that has happened.
Yes. So my riff on this is, when you start a project like the owner and the contractor, it's like the legal system, right? It's adversarial, right? Yeah. There's a contract, you've got to meet it, I'm going to make sure you meet it, right? 2 or 3 months prior to end, and there's a tenant signed on the dotted line, all of a sudden, their interests completely aligned. We have to get this sucker across the line, right? And that's what happens. And then the complaining starts after it goes across the line and the tenant moves in, But I always feel developers like that. They're like the battered wife, he's a good man, he provides, but, and the policeman's trying to drag her off him, but I love him, It's
very true.
It's it's a form of contractual abuse, I think, when you're not getting what you pay for, right? Yeah. And then you're not coming down with the hammer of the gods on someone who does that to you, but you just go, okay, well, catch you on the next one.
Well, it's so daft that for one client, we wanted to, after we'd agreed the guaranteed maximum price with the contractor, we wanted to put in a converged network rather than two separate, like a controls and a production one. And so we said, would it be possible for you to just take out half the wires, please? Is effectively what it was. And they wanted an additional £2 million for half the equipment because of the change, because I think they were worried about the technical ability to like pull that off.
Yeah.
So I think there's also, if I could have a fourth one, please, perhaps a broad lack of skills and understanding about the risks that folks are or aren't getting into.
Actually, I think the skill shortage is, I mean, we're seeing this everywhere in our business now. There is a massive skill shortage. What they call it in America, the grey tsunami, right? It's all sort of like everyone's retiring and there's not enough. There's good people behind, but the numbers are not there, right? It's a capacity issue. And then now we're asking on top of that problem to have extra highly skilled or an extra knowledge acquiring to go on, right?
Yeah, because it is extra. They need to learn all the fundamentals of the built environment. Oh, and then all the technology.
Yeah, so here's your degree. Have a nice day. By the way, you know nothing about what you're going to do.
Yeah, genuinely. And then it changes every couple of years. So if you're not like constantly a student, you've been left behind.
The Edifice Complex will continue in just a moment.
Are you passionate about the built environment? Do you want to learn from the industry's most inspiring, intelligent, and accomplished professionals? Then the companion to this podcast, Wisdom of the Property Crowd, is just the book for you. From Edifice Complex podcast interviews, this book distills the critical thinking, insight, and ideas of some of the property industry's most accomplished and respected practitioners. Each chapter is a synopsis of an hour-plus interview, capturing the takeaways and insights, including diagrams and images, to help explain concepts and ideas. There's also a brief bio about the interviewee and a QR code linked to the podcast episode for those that want to explore further. These are the mentors you wish you had in college. Wisdom of the Property Crowd by Adam Muggleton. Available on Amazon worldwide.
And now, back to the show.
All right, so if you've got, I mean, you're the person I know, you probably know, certainly in my circle, you're the person who knows the most about this, right? So are there some examples in the built environment, like complete buildings working, that could, if the owners let us, we could walk around and go, oh, that's what it looks like?
Yeah, for sure. So the most prominent example globally, I would say, is the Edge in Amsterdam.
Right.
An old example now, it's probably maybe approaching 15 years old. But OVG, the developer, did such an amazing job working with Deloitte in building out a really sort of fancy, smart building that I think that's why it's so well known. I would say, in hindsight, it's probably a very sort of first version because it's about technology and being very technical, but it still performs. So I'm not sure it's got the user sort of huggability that you might expect. I don't know if that's a word.
Let's make it one.
Yeah, exactly. But that's a great case study. Obviously, crazy biased, but what I did at Accenture at a place called The Dock, which was their global innovation center, that we probably did a lot more on the user side of things. So you could like look up on the app where a particular people with skills were sitting at any time. So if you had an idea, it's like, I need to know talk to somebody who knows analytics. You could you look up the one that you like the look of most and go have a conversation with them. Or the silly example I had earlier about opening a meeting room with your signature dance move. That was one of the things that we'd programmed because we wanted it to be like a place that's all about ideas as an innovation center. And if you've just seen your boss's boss's boss do the funky chicken, all of a sudden your opinion matters. Or, we'd ask people like 10 stupid questions. Pretend you're 6 and still cool. What did you want to be when you grow up? And we fix the answers like jungle bridge repairer, soybean farmer, whale whisperer. And so the idea was that if we're bringing people from kind of all over the world and two of you go, who wanted to be a librarian? That might start a connection. Or we built like a sort of business Tinder. So let's say, you would tell it about your interests in your mobile app. And then let's say we were in front of one of the big screens in the lift lobby and it knows that we're both standing there. I like space and you like drones. It would say, hey, Matt and Adam, you two should go make space drones. And so it was lots of like silly bits of nudges combined with like location services that made it feel like the building was trying to curate your experience, which is a very different one to what the Edge was doing. And then
so that was an evolution, effectively, right?
Yeah, we've gone a lot more kind of human-centric on it. It probably didn't have anywhere near the same sustainability credentials as a retrofit, but I thought, done a lot better on the human side of things. And then more recently, probably 22 Bishopsgate in central London is Europe's largest commercial building. I think that's really pushed the boundaries on what's achievable at scale and is also very commercial. So it's got a lot of HVAC analytics in, so it can balance things that are happening across the building from a sustainability perspective. We did a load of modelling about what the blind system could do, so that's fully controlled because of it being so glazed to improve its sustainability credentials. It's got facial recognition so that we wouldn't have to print off tens of thousands of little plastic cards for people to get in. It's got a community app that is like, it's free ice cream today, come down and meet some people. So it was a kind of blend of all of those things, but in the context of bringing over 1 million square feet to market.
That's really interesting because that's 1 million square feet. That is not a small building. I've seen that building, right? I've seen the blinds go on and off. I could tell someone was commissioning that when I was walking down the road. But what's interesting about that as well, that's a sort of typical developer build and then let model, right? Which for a central business district is what's going on. So that would be fascinating to see how that sits. Now, the inner nerd in me is thinking, right, has anyone been back and like studied these buildings like 5 years out, 10 years out, and seen if there's any lessons learned?
No, because of the ownership model, that's probably the problem. But I know from 22, just because it's closest to my old home, they use the stuff every day. The ops team love it, and they are able to curate an experience that feels like really premium for what is effectively a bunch of offices.
So we've got to get someone neutral in it. It's say in 22 Bishopsgate and like convince them to share that data so we can study it and learn, right? Because we're not, that's one of the things I think that's the real benefit. This data could be gifted to academia. Like, you can't make money out of it, but you can learn from it type thing. And, release the hounds, the nerds. Exactly. Let's find out what's going on. Because the idea is, and I think this is where the real value is, you take this data and you learn. Let's be honest, right? If you are designing building services, ASHRAE or CIBSE guides, right? If someone sues you, you go to court, you say, honest governor, CIBSE guide C said this and I did it. And you're off the hook, right?
Yeah.
Right? We've been doing that for, 100 years? It's not good enough. We've got to be saying the data says, the use profile for the water heater is this, therefore I'm sizing it plus a little bit, right?
Whereas we now have continuous measurement of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If the legal situation is, if you get sued, you have to pull the ASHRAE or CIBSE defence, that's never going to happen, right? And the only way you're going to get out of that is to take that data out, analyse it, and have universities endorse the validity of that method, right?
Yeah.
And that's a journey of 5 or 10 years probably, right?
Because the CIBSE aren't reinvesting their membership fees into that sort of research.
No, they're invested in reinventing codes that don't need to happen. That's another story. Anyway, bitchy, meow. Okay, we're coming near the end. What do you think the future looks like here, like 5 years out and 10 years out? Now, that doesn't sound like a lot of time, but we're talking dog years here with technology, right? So where do you think this goes? I mean, I'm pretty sure your career is pretty locked in and looking good right now. Right?
Exactly. So the next 5 years, I would say we are going to find a way to get those systems to talk properly to each other. And we will probably agree roughly that this is the method for storing the data. And then the kind of secret sauce would be the applications and the intelligence you apply to it after. And that could be to do with proving sustainability for the purposes of ESG. It could be having the easiest way, but the securest way to get into a building. It could be trying to solve a lot of health and well-being type situations around sort of sick building syndrome. So I think we will get to a point where we've probably got 80% of the way of solving setup and then what to do with it. So it will be the stuff that I think most people would expect we've already solved and we haven't.
So you're talking about standards, basically, right?
Yeah.
Standardization, standards we all agree on. Who champions that? Is that a CIBSE thing or an ASHRAE thing, or is there a...
It probably should be, but at the minute, there are those that set up commercial badges or standards who are trying to lead the way, but I don't think they've... In trying to develop a standard that you can apply to a particular typology, for smart, I don't think works because it's the context of the business that matters that is happening there. So that's where they're falling short.
Oh, if we have another bloody certification scheme, I'm going to kill myself.
Yeah.
I beg you, Ashra and Sibsy, get
Solve
involved.
it.
We do not need another certification certificate.
Exactly.
Okay.
Or groups of vendors are grouping together, giving themselves names and are effectively acting as a cartel, I would say, to point people to a particular product.
Yes. Yeah. And that's what, unless someone with real authority like Ashra or Sibsy get involved, that's exactly where it's going, right?
Yeah.
We got to stop that. You got to stop that because you are a doctor of smart meeting.
Yeah.
Just so you know, everybody, Matthew's PhD says, what does it say? Doctor of Philosophy, Smart Buildings, right?
It does, yeah.
I'd say that's a mic drop. Just do it. I'm out. Matthew out. Okay, all right. So,
Do you want the 10-year answer?
yeah, what's the 10-year answer?
I'm actually quite excited by what AI could do. Like, you can't talk smart buildings without dropping
Yeah.
the AI bomb at the minute.
Okay.
But I'm not so... I don't think our building will become self-aware. I just want like a couple of basics like solved. So I really like the butler in Downton Abbey, Mr. Carson. And I want to train my Siri to act as Mr. Carson. So it will know everything that I like when I go to a building. And then what I expect is when I go somewhere, my pocket butler will talk to the butler of the building. And just like if I visited the big house, the two systems would have a conversation and it knows my preferences, what if that's a Diet Coke that it needs to get me as part of like the welcome package, or if I've got any accessibility requirements or temperatures or whatever those sorts of things are. I think we'll do stuff like that, or just real basics. Why can't we match availability with like dietary requirements and rooms? Why does it take for a PA or somebody who is really good on scheduling assistant in order to solve how to get people together? There is a system that can do that.
God, you've just created possibly a sub-sector of software there, like Building Butler.
Yeah.
TM, Matthew, right?
Yeah, exactly.
You heard it here.
Exactly.
So,
Downton Systems.
This needs, I hate to say this needs some big beast like Google to come in and solve this, does it not?
Well, I wonder what Microsoft Places will do.
Yeah.
Because they've got all of the kind of information that we use in Teams, and then to add a spatial component to it, I'm quite excited. Or because it knows who we email or we ping on Teams, then maybe it can make us sit together so that I don't have to do those sorts, and I get more of an in-person. That's a really interesting
concept, like the expansion of Teams into certainly to interface with the Building Butler, right?
Yeah, something spatial.
Yeah.
That's exciting.
Sadella, if you're watching this.
Yeah, have a word.
All right, so I think that's interesting. My takeaway is if the standards can be normalised over the next, say, 5 years, there is the opportunity to get to that like Building Butler concept, I think.
Because we need to get that base work done.
Yeah.
Because the system will need like a bit of order and structure to know what it's looking at in order to do that cool stuff.
Now, the libertarian in me hates to say this, but I actually think there needs to be a lot of open source data, and there need to be regulations that require open source reporting, right? So, for example, if the building code says so many air changes an hour per blah, 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 we get the technology exists today in every BMS system to measure that and report that, right? But no one gets the slap on the wrist today.
No.
So that's where I'd like to see that go, because I think the only way you're going to get that level of disclosure, which is going to surface the information we need to make better buildings, is going to have to be force, not voluntary, right? And that's legislation, right?
Yeah, regulation will really push it.
Because there's also I think a lobbying function has to happen here to get this where we're talking where there's a butler and the information's surfaced and the information is passed on to academia for research, right?
Yeah,
that's the dream.
That is the dream.
Okay, so we'll wrap it up there. Have you got anything else you want to tell us? Any secret I don't know, or is it all in here?
It's all in there. The takeaway is the business case, I think, is so good that for every $1 that you invest in smart building technology, you should expect to see at least $3 returned in value.
I read that in there. That's one of my bookmarks. Okay, so you're saying then for every $1 down, there's a potential $3 return on investment.
Minimum, and I think it increases with the more that you deploy it over.
Okay, I will put that in the show notes
there is
just
a graph
to trigger everyone.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, so everybody, I will put a link in the show notes to this book. Go and buy it. It's not big, but it is got everything in there you need. And if I had to go and do a pitch and just look like I knew what I was doing, I would read this book and I'd probably be 80% now, I tell you. So
Exactly.
It's good. I'm very impressed. Well
Thank
done.
you.
Congratulations. And thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
You've been listening to the Edifice Complex podcast with Adam Muggleton and Robert Bean. To access show notes for this episode, visit edificecomplexpodcast.com. If you have enjoyed this podcast, please leave us a review on iTunes. See you next time.